So it's just become like a sequenced chain for her. I'm just going to pull the hair because I really need that predictability in this exchange right now. So it's not, I'm just doing this for attention because I'm a sport, but sometimes it's I'm looking for something predictable that gives me a sense of control over this situation. And, you know.
Or I find that, like, I've had clients I've worked with who are apraxic and get stuck in what we call like a motor loop, right? They get stuck in that loop of you're reinforcing, I'm saying again, you're reinforcing, I'm saying again. And you saying that predictable statement is actually the trigger to me doing it again.
What if behaviour wasn't something to fix, but something to understand? Welcome to Behave, the podcast to relearn behaviour. We're Eleanor Brink and Erica Gleeson, advanced behaviour practitioners who believe it's time to do things differently. If you want to understand why behaviour happens and how to actually support it, you're in the right place. This is Behave, because when we know better, we do better.
Before we dive in, just a quick note. Everything we share here is shaped by our own clinical experience, lived experience, and the research we're guided by. We're always speaking in general terms, not giving individual advice. And we know every human and every nervous system is different. So take what fits for you, leave what doesn't, and always trust your gut. All right, let's get into it.
Today's episode is all about the why of behaviour. So we work under a modality called positive behaviour support. And one of the distinctive characteristics of PBS is that all the work that we do for the people that we support is guided by their why. And we might do a whole different episode that talks about the difference between PBS and psychology and other modalities.
Yes. And I guess like why we care about the why.
Yes, exactly.
The why guides truly everything we do. And it's what we're basing most of our decisions on.
So positive behaviour support is a particular modality. Step one in that process is always to do an assessment, which helps us determine what the why is. Then we develop programs, then we put responsive strategies together and behaviour support plans, then we monitor an evaluation, but all the preceding steps come from the why. So what that means is behaviours happen for a reason. They are a communication tool, they're functional, they're purposeful most of the time.
Most of the
time for the person that has them.
Yeah. All behaviour can communicate something to you. Not all behaviour is communication. And the reason I like to highlight that distinction is that some people have bodies that their brain and body might not connect in the way they want it to, and their body might not be responding in the way they want it to, even if their brain is sending a message. So I'll give you an example. Somebody sitting on the ground and they're being asked to get up. Now, we could interpret that as if they're not getting up, they're being defiant, they're communicating that they don't want to. That might be the case in some instances, but it's not always the case. If you have somebody who has an apraxic body, has issues with motor planning, motor initiation, their brain might be telling their body to get up, but their body might be having a really hard time getting started. So it's communicating to the people around them, hey, I need help. I need you to break down the instruction or help me start my initiation. But it might not be communication in the sense of they're telling you to go fuck off.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Great description of that. There is also an incredibly small percentage of behaviours which are what we call biobehavioural, which means they actually are not purposeful for the individual. And in my 17 years, I've only ever worked with one person who falls into that category. So when we talk about the functions, there are typically 4 main functions. So when we look at a formal assessment tool, the way we determine functions is usually a mix of informal and formal assessments. So we do observations, interviews, we do formal assessments. There's lots of different tools, and then we bring it all together to form a hypothesis. That's what we as behaviour support practitioners do. But we're going to talk through today some ways that you as a parent or a caregiver or an allied health professional or an educator can start to try and work out what the why is without having to use all these tools.
One thing I want to highlight is that the why does not just relate to behaviours of concern or behaviours that have risk. These functions of behaviour underpin all behavior.
Yes.
Underpin everything you and I are doing constantly. They underpin, I know people will find this triggering, but animal behavior as well. It underpins all behavior. So it's not something we're specifically looking at in relation to behaviors of concern.
Not behaviors of concern, just principles of behavior.
Yeah.
So one of them is, there's different terms for these depending on who you talk to, but the first one is some people refer to as tangible, which means my behavior serves as a way to communicate that I want or need something. I need to acquire something. I'm trying to communicate that I want to go outside, that I need a drink, I need something.
Access
Access
is another.
to something. Now, the opposite of wanting something is not wanting it. So then we have an escape or protest function. So an example of that might be, I don't want to get off the swing at the end of my session, or this environment is incredibly overstimulating for me and I need to get out of this environment. So my behavior serves as a way to communicate that I need out of whatever is happening.
Yeah. And with that, if somebody has contacted that consequence before, so if I know that when Erica rings the bell, she's going to ask me to get off the swing in 5 minutes, she might ring the bell. She might not ask me to get off the swing, but I know that demand is coming and I want to avoid it. So I might start engaging in the behavior then. Another example that I like to think in real life is if we turn our maps on to go somewhere and we see, oh, the usual route I take is all red, there's lots of traffic, I'm going to take a different route. We're changing our behavior to avoid taking a long time on the route we usually go. So these functions have helpful consequences as well as sometimes problematic consequences.
So another real life example that always comes to mind when I think of protest is a lady that I worked with very early on in my career. She was about 65 and had a severe intellectual disability. And every time her staff took her to the shopping centre, she took all her clothes off. So we call it derobing. But she was a 65-year-old lady with an intellectual disability in the middle of Westfield in the nude. And that was the referral issue. It didn't take long to work out what had occurred, in that she had showed so many signs that she didn't want to be there. She had engaged in self-injurious behavior and they had just sort of buffered that and redirected her. She had tried to make particular noises to communicate certain messages. She didn't have the communication tools around her to be able to say, I want out. And so she had figured out the one surefire way to get me out of here was to get nude. And they would wrap her up in a towel or a jumper or whatever they had on, standby, get her home. And I said, how does she present when she's home? They're like, happy as Larry, puts Days of Our Lives on, everything's hunky-dory. So it was a really clear function of escape. I don't want to be here. I have developed a behavior which helps me communicate that. And that behavior is reinforced because every time I get nude, I get out of here.
And it's getting her needs met, right?
It's getting her needs met. So we'll talk a little bit about reinforcing consequences a little further on in the episode, but that is another clear example of escape. The third main one we see is what's called, I call it interaction.
Yeah, which I like. Typically, you'll know this one as attention, which I don't love.
I don't love because it still represents an unmet need. And attention doesn't signify that.
I think as well, when the word attention comes with a lot of connotations, it comes with being bratty or being needy or seeking, or you want that attention on you. It doesn't really underpin maybe more of the connection need that we see a lot of the time. Or it can present as class clown needing attention.
Yeah.
But what is the actual stuff underpinning that? It's probably deeper.
And it's not always I want attention or I want interaction. Sometimes it's I know that if I do this, it will elicit a very predictable interaction. For a lot of my clients that I support, particularly those on the autism spectrum, they need that predictability. So I'm thinking of a client that I work with who pulls hair, and every time she pulls hair, her staff say, we don't pull hair. So it's just become like a sequenced chain for her. I'm just going to pull the hair because I really need that predictability in this exchange right now. So it's not, I'm just doing this for attention because I'm a sport brat. Sometimes it's I'm looking for something predictable that gives me a sense of control over this situation. And,
or I find that I've had clients I've worked with who are apraxic and get stuck in what we call like a motor loop,
Yeah.
right? They get stuck in that loop of you're reinforcing, I'm saying again, you're reinforcing, I'm saying again.
Mhm.
And you saying that predictable statement is actually the trigger to me doing it again. And yeah, that's a whole another can of worms that we'll talk about. But yes.
And then the fourth main one we see is referred to as sensory, or there's some sort of automatic internal reinforcement for the person.
Yeah. So that really the highlight on that is that another person is not necessarily needed to get that reinforcement.
So let's
Need
provide
that.
some examples on that. So some common ones include somebody who might engage in fecal smearing, for instance, and the function is
Oh,
identified.
you really just went there.
I thought, let's just go.
I was going to be like, oh, like when you get like a mosquito bite and you itch it, that's an example of a behavior you're engaging in to get automatic reinforcement. And Erica's like, nah, let's talk about fucking poop.
Let's talk about smearing poo on ourselves. So you go low level, I'll go high level. This is how it's going to work.
I'm just going to like, build us
So
up.
for some of us, smear poo.
Multiply.
So something where you get a feedback from. So yes, the satisfaction of scratching something that's itchy gives you internal feedback. So the smearing of feces for some people is somewhat self-soothing, or for some people they might hit their head repetitively on a hard surface because they get that particular feedback, or screaming.
Yeah, a lot of stimming. Right.
Yes.
Like, and you'll find yourself like, I notice I like touch my hair a lot. Like that's obviously providing me some sort of automatic reinforcement, comfort, connection.
Yes. Now, where it gets tricky. So let's just say we did our assessment work and we go, great, you've got a couple of behaviors there and they all fall under tangible, or this particular behavior just falls under escape. If that was as easy as our job was, great, but it doesn't often look like that. What it usually looks like is that you've got one behavior that can serve multiple functions, sometimes all four of those functions.
Right. And then the challenge is, okay, in this context, I need you to respond to this function, but then over here, I need you to do something different. And parents or support workers are like, well, it all looks the same to me. So I'm meant to be supporting behavior and responding to behavior, but also analyzing the situation in the moment. And it's like overload, right? It's really hard.
Really hard. And that's a tricky scenario when they hold multiple functions. You've also got some behaviors that are initiated by one function, but then maintained by another function. So I might pull your hair because I get sensory feedback from that. But then the interaction that you give me
is just like
reinforces
extra.
it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Or like the one that I think of too is like, the classic, a kid in class who's scream or being disruptive and they get sent out of the class. The teacher thinks they're punishing the behavior because they're letting them get out, but really maybe they're escaping the demand of doing the work. And then when they're in the hallway, kids are walking past and I'm getting attention. So it might be that initially it's around escape from the work, but then it's getting maintained by that attention from other people in the hallway.
And this is not to get up on my high horse so early on in the episode, but one of my gripes with suspensions or with getting expelled from school is that most of the time they are the kids that are finding it tricky, academically or socially, emotionally, whatever. And so a behavior occurs and then they are removed from the thing that they're finding tricky. So therefore it is just reinforcing the behavior. It is not teaching them anything different.
Yeah.
It's not identifying the why. Anyway, let's move on.
Yeah, I want to say 10 things there, but I think this is not our school episode. So
that's coming. That's coming. So the other thing I wanted to talk about when we all know I love an analogy.
Well, feedback has been that people love Erica's metaphors, analogies, so go for it.
So I wanted to introduce the idea of what we call an anger iceberg. So what we know about icebergs is that we see the tip, but quite literally there are often kilometers and kilometers of icebergs sitting beneath the surface. Now, we as human beings are incredibly weird, complex creatures in that often how we see someone presenting looks to us like anger. If somebody's hitting a wall, throwing a chair, going to punch us in the face, all of those things to us go, oh my gosh, that person is so angry. But that is because the feelings that we have beneath the surface, and we'll talk a little bit later about the difference between behaviors and feelings, but the feelings that we have beneath the surface, let's just say I'm feeling overwhelmed or guilty, or I'm feeling disrespected. All of these pretty complex emotions that we experience usually manifest in a way that looks like anger. And why that's relevant It's relevant for many different reasons, but one of the main things is that how we respond to somebody who's angry is incredibly different to how we would respond to somebody who's feeling guilty.
Yeah.
So the next time you see a behavior of concern that looks like the person is incredibly angry, just take stock of the fact that that is likely not the emotion that they're actually feeling that brought about that behavior in the first place. So what we're only seeing and what we're only responding to is this, the tip, but behavior is incredibly complex.
Yeah.
And this is all the stuff that we want to educate you on, all of the stuff that's happening in the brain, triggers, setting events, maintaining consequences. Because once you have a greater understanding of the why and how complex it is, you will look at behavior so differently. And as a result, you will probably be more proactive. And as a result, you will respond to it in a different way. That's our dream, I guess.
Yeah, just drop that bomb. No, that's perfect. I think really like the takeaway from that is like empathy and compassion and kindness, right? Like it's really, really hard when we see someone who is being overtly aggressive or yelling, or you can feel that energy coming and your safety might feel threatened or the safety of others around you feel threatened. And you respond from a place of fear based on what you're seeing. But yeah, when we understand the layers underneath it, it encourages us to respond more from a place of compassion, which will typically also de-escalate the behavior, which tends to help.
It's a really cliched saying, but it's very fitting in that the person is not giving you a hard time, they are having a hard time. But in the moment, it's really hard to logically apply that.
Yeah, because as well, you're also in this situation, right? Like I think as well, we're talking all about the individual who's having a hard time and engaging in this behavior, but that doesn't take away from the fact that the people in their environment are also in this situation and responding to this behavior, and their bodies are also getting triggered, right? And their brains might be going offline and all of that. So it is, the whole dynamic is complex.
And one of the first steps that we usually do as part of our process is also a risk assessment, because we need to make sure that how we're responding to behavior actually matches the level of risk and also matches the risk appetite of the people. So our appetite for risk is probably incredibly high by virtue of what we've seen and what we do, but other people have a low appetite for risk. And so we just need to make sure that there's a balance between the risk that the behavior presents and the associated responses that are in place. Notice how we're not saying reactions, so very careful with our language. We don't have behavior management strategies. We don't have reactive strategies. It's all about a response.
Yeah. Yes. So, okay, that's a nice segue into our ABCs of behavior. So anyone who's been in a school setting or done anything to do with behavior is going to know the ABC.
Behavior support 101.
Yeah. And it's like used across contexts. Really what it is we're talking about antecedent, behavior, consequence. So antecedent is what happens before the behavior occurs. Behavior is what is the observable behavior. What are we seeing? Not, oh, the person was sad. Remember, oh, the person dropped to the ground, they were crying, whatever else. And then consequences, what happened in response to that behavior.
So how did people respond? And then what effect did that have on the behavior? Some people say antecedent, and that really drives me bonkers.
Antecedent? I've never say that again.
So ABCs.
Antecedent.
So if we're looking at the basics of just like data collection or understanding a behavior, like step one is just getting some basic ABC information.
Yeah, being a behavior detective. This is always what we will have people in the environment do, is take some ABC data, because it's really helpful for us to know. That's how we develop our hypothesis. What's happening before the behavior? What was the behavior and what happened after?
People are usually pretty clued into the A's and the B's. So, it happened because the door slammed, or it happened because their sibling came into the room. The C, the consequence, is the one that's often overlooked. And that's typically because people don't necessarily understand the relationship between how a behavior is responded to and the likelihood of that behavior happening again. So with that example you provided before about the student being exited from the classroom and that being reinforced, because A, I get out of the class that I found incredibly difficult. And then B, I get all this interaction from people in the hallway. All of that, everything about that is reinforced.
So let's look at that in two lenses, right? So let's say we have a student who calls out in the class and they get sent out of the classroom. Now, being sent out of the classroom could be a reinforcement for some people if they called out or whatever because they didn't want to be in the class, they were trying to get out of the work, they called out, they got to leave. But for another person, maybe being sent out of the classroom is actually really punishing because, oh my gosh, everybody looked at me. I hated that. I got in trouble. All of these things, whether it's reinforcement or punishment, is going to depend on if it happens again in the future.
Yeah.
So if it happens again more and more because they're getting sent out of the classroom, the calling out happens more, then we see that as reinforcement. Whereas if it doesn't happen again, then that's actually punishment that's actually worked, which sometimes it does.
It has worked in the short term.
In that
It hasn't changed behavior.
Say it was an accident, right? Like say
impulse control.
Right.
Yes,
something
exactly.
that was a novel trigger in the environment and this kid is like, oh my gosh, blah, blah, blah. And then they get sent out and they're like, okay, well, I'll never do that again. Whoops. Like, because sometimes, and that's when we go like, just the punishment for the crap. Like, was that necessary? Did we have to respond that way? Like, that's what I work a lot with my families on. It's like, do we need to respond to this behavior or can we just move on over it?
And when you look at some data and when you look at the patterns and then you give feedback and say, I'm not sure if you've noticed, but every time the behavior is responded to in this way, this happens, people tend to go, oh my God, I never thought of it like that. All I was looking at was what was triggering it and the behavior itself. I wasn't actually looking at what was maintaining it, because any behavior that is reinforced will occur again.
Yes.
So that is ABCs. Now, that's something that any person can start to look into. So my suggestion is, if you don't have a behavior support practitioner, if you're having trouble with something, step one, just start to jot down a couple of dot points under ABC each time the behavior occurs. And then once you've got a little bit of a data set, you will see patterns. You will see some things that help you understand what the function is or what's maintaining the behavior or what the particular patterns are that we're seeing.
Setting events versus triggers. So your ABC data sheet is going to help you likely identify more so your triggers, right? That thing that happened just before the behavior. Now, a lot of the time we'll see, oh, well, the door slamming in the afternoon made her scream, but it slammed in the morning and nothing happened. So what's the difference? And that's where we look at setting events. So what are the other things that are going on in the environment? Is there a relationship between the time of day? Is there a relationship between the people who are in the environment? Where the place, the location, is it after something like the classic after school, right? Things are going to be more triggering when there's less capacity when they've been at school all day.
So one way to differentiate the two is, like I tend to say, setting events are usually something underlying. Sometimes it's something that's happened minutes, hours, sometimes even days before an incident, and it's just laying dormant. So think about the analogy we've given before about water in your cup. So things that have filled the water up in the cup, and then the trigger is most likely the thing that just causes the cup to overflow.
Yeah, a birthday party or moving house.
I've got a toothache, but I can't communicate that. I've got a cold coming, but nobody really knows that.
I'm hormonal.
I had an altercation at school today. So the underlying stuff.
I haven't slept. Gosh, I could just keep going on.
We could keep going. So usually in our behavior support plans, you'll always see setting events and triggers listed separately because they hold different functions.
The idea being, when we know setting events are present, we are going to be very proactive in how we are supporting the individual. That's probably less likely the term we're going to try and teach a new skill in the afternoon when you're already tired and I already know that you're about to lose your shit. I'm not going to be like, no, I need you to say help, oh, sign. And then we've already had a behavior and we're not.
We're like, here's a snack. I'm not talking to you for 20 minutes to decompress.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the question is, this is all so helpful, but why does the why matter? Now, the why matters for many different reasons. If, let's just say we've identified what the why is, that typically tells us that there is probably a skill deficit in some area. So I exhibit behavior because I need to get out of this environment. There are dogs here and I hate dogs and I can't really communicate that. I need an escape route. And I don't know how to do that. So I run away. I abscond or wander or elope out of this. That is the behavior, wandering. But that means that I need to be taught a new skill, which is how to communicate that I need out. Right? So the why always tells us what the person actually needs to be taught. And that is we've talked about it previously, but one of the fundamental flaws with punishment. Say I ran out of here and you said, you're a naughty girl, go sit in the corner.
Go back in that room with the dogs and learn to cope.
You need to think about what you've done and have some reflection time.
Actually, spend an extra 10 minutes in there. That's actually a strategy, guys.
Yeah, this is all derived from stuff we hear every day. That hasn't addressed the fact that I don't know how to communicate that this is all too much for me and I need out.
And you might not even know that this is all too much for you, right? Like this I think is also the really hard thing is like, there's typically a couple of skills that are missing. And that's where it's our job we look at the situation and we go, okay, what do we need to prioritize? Which one can I teach you that is going to help you the most in the most settings and help you get out of depending what it is, but get your needs met more often than not.
So that is the goal, helping people get their needs met in a more functional, safer way.
Yes.
So the why needs to be the response needs to be matched to the why, as well as the skill development needs to be matched to the why. So we need to make sure that the responses that we're giving people aren't reinforcing the behavior. And the only way we know that is what is the why. So it's not only about skill development, it's also about what our response strategies are.
Yeah. And so actually, let's do a little example of this, because say I have Erica who screams at me to get access to the champagne, right?
That's a real life scenario.
And instead of me teaching Erica how to ask for the champagne, I'm teaching her a regulation strategy. She's there screaming and I'm like, no, I need you to take a deep breath. Take a deep breath. Let's sit together. Okay, cool, done. And in my head, I'm so great. I've taught her a regulation strategy for when she screams. But the behavior's not going away, but why? If I had just taught her how to request for champagne, my life would be great. She'd be buzzing with her champagne. There'd be no screaming. A regulation strategy is not the solution to everything.
And the other thing, and we'll now do skill development in a whole separate. But let's just say you gave me a visual that is champagne that I can just hold up at any stage.
Yeah.
We need that to work almost more effectively than me screaming.
Yes.
So the skills that you teach somebody have to be accessible and easy and fast. Otherwise, I'd be like, well, fuck the visual.
Yeah.
Screaming gets me the champagne much quicker.
Absolutely.
So there's a lot to it. This is what we mean when we say it's more complex than what it seems.
And when we're talking about really kind of high risk behavior, we will actually start with like Erica, just her eyes glancing towards the visual. She doesn't
like, sick, get her.
Yeah, here you go. Like, we're going to reinforce that. And that's, again, a whole nother episode, but we can just go down these tangents as we do. Erica's checking up.
I just want to make sure we're on track. This is your note that you can speak to. The challenge with kids and siblings when you're managing multiple skill deficits.
Yeah. So this is all like fine and dandy. I see this a lot with social skills or with when we're like practicing turn taking or requesting. It's all great when we're practicing the skill with an adult because an adult is going to reinforce the behavior. So say Erica asks me for my toy and I'm like, yep, here you go. Great. She's engaged in the new learning response of asking me for my requesting, and then she's gotten what she wants. I've reinforced her request. But now she's on the playground with little Tommy, and she asked little Tommy for the toy, and little Tommy's like, absolutely fucking not. I'm playing with this truck. I'm not giving it to you. And Erica's like, well, I requested like they taught me. It didn't work, so I'm going to punch little Tommy in the
Going back
face
to what I know.
and get this fucking truck. I got a little bit passionate on that.
I love it.
Little Tommy. But like, that's a really, that's a good example of like, if the behavior doesn't get reinforced, it's not the new behavior, the learning doesn't get reinforced, it's not going to keep progressing and become a skill in their toolbox, right? But when you've got siblings or you've got multiple kids with social skill deficits, you're then trying to manage teaching this child to learn a new skill and teaching this child to tolerate no and teaching this child to request. And it's a lot.
It's a million balls to have to juggle. So we want to try and make this process of understanding behavior, which, as I've said before, I think is the ultimate goal, as easy for you as possible. So we have some templates that we are going to share.
Yeah.
We'll figure out how to get those to you, but effectively it just gives you a starting point.
Click the link below.
There probably won't be a link
TBD on the link, but yes, there will.
Yeah,
Brandon,
sort this out for
our
us.
producer, will put the link below.
Yes, we'll figure it out. But we will give you some templates which just give you the guiding questions, the areas to start putting some dot points on. Get a couple of data sets together, look at them, sing out to us if you need help understanding. But this is fundamentally teaching you the bare basics of understanding your child's behavior or the person you're supporting's behavior. Then we can move on to strategy. So our next episode, you're probably listening to this going, great, but this isn't telling me what to do.
Give me a takeaway.
That's the next episode. So you actually gonna have to stick around.
Or wait 2 weeks.
Yeah, exactly.
Another little hot tip is actually use the ABC data sheet on yourself, because you can self-monitor your behavior and actually see your relationships, and that might help you then do it with somebody else.
Giving you some personal insight, which we often lack, particularly then when we've got a little bit of the cortisol and the adrenaline pumping through our systems. So
we'll use it on positive behavior, like use it on skills as well, right? Like it doesn't it's just about seeing relationships between behavior and the environment. It doesn't have to be around behaviors that we're trying to change.
Patterns.
Yeah.
I'd like to finish on a quote, if I may.
I want you to love everybody.
Yes.
The prophet is here.
Here she is.
I thought you weren't on your high horse this episode. I'm so hard to see you up there.
Permanently up on the stallion. The question I want you to ask yourself is, what is this behavior telling me? Not, how do I stop it? That is an incredibly difficult reframe for a lot of people, particularly parents who tend to be a little bit more emotionally invested in what's happening.
Yeah.
Our job is not always to stop behavior. Sometimes behavior just has to run its course. Obviously, our role is to stop it if there are risks that are identified and that we just cannot let this continue. But if there are no risks identified in the moment, the role is not necessarily to stop it. The goal is to try and understand it. And once we understand it, we can work toward reducing how frequently it occurs, and we can work toward reducing how severe each incident is.
Mm-hmm. And teaching a replacement skill.
Okay,
thanks so much, guys. Tune in 2 weeks for our next ep.
Before we go, we'd like to acknowledge the Biripi people as the traditional custodians of the land on which we record. If this episode resonated, make sure you subscribe to Behave wherever you listen to your poddies, and follow us on Instagram for more conversations about behaviour. Our handle is @BehaveThePodcast. Thanks for being here. And remember, when we know better, we do better.